Good afternoon. It's nice to see everybody on this lovely spring day. It looks like spring is here, and I'm going to knock on wood as I say that. I'm Lynette Clementson. I'm director of Wallace House. We have two programs. Many of you have been to our programs before. The Knight-Wallace Fellowships for Journalists, which brings accomplished journalists to the university for a year of immersive study every year, and the Livingston Awards for young journalists. And our program is the home for professional journalism here on campus. And we work to uphold the place and role of journalism in society at a time when it needs to be reinforced, the role that journalism plays in upholding our democracy. And we help to support the careers of journalists, which are harder and harder around the world, and that is one of the things that brings us here today. Today's program is the Eisendrath Symposium, named for Charles Eisendrath, who built the program as we know it today and ran it for 30 years. I'm going to bring Charles up to say a few words in just a moment, but first I'd like to thank our co-sponsors. Michigan Radio, I think many of you may be here because you heard the promotion this week on Michigan Radio. I was very happy when I would be on my way to the store or somewhere and hear about today's event. So thank you to Michigan Radio for always being such a good partner. Also the Knight Foundation, which is rarely in the room with us, but is always with us, apparent in our name, the Knight-Wallace Fellowships for Journalists, and in journalism broadly. The Knight Foundation is an organization that supports the work of journalists around the country, and we are one of the many beneficiaries of their good work, and so we always thank them. And also the Center for Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies. I see students in the room, and I want to thank you for coming out. I also want to say that as in our public events, part of what we're trying to do is bring communities together to have conversations around pieces of journalism and around the work that journalists do. We had an event last week in the same building but downstairs in Rackham Auditorium, and Ronan Farrow and Ken Aletta were here from the New Yorker, and there were many students in the audience. And after the event, a young woman ran up to me. She introduced herself. Her name is Evelyn Wallace. And she really ran to catch up with me and told me how much she liked the event. And she said, can students volunteer at your events? And I said, well, yes, they can, because you just asked me. And we're having an event next week. And so, where's Evelyn? Evelyn, stand up. So many of you may have had your programs handed to you by Evelyn Wallace, and with a name like Wallace, she should certainly be volunteering for us. I really like enterprising students with a lot of hustle, and so to those students in the room who are interested in journalism, we hope that this event interests you even more, and we are always happy to have you follow us and run up to us on the street, and I'm happy to talk about journalism anytime. And to have you stop by Wallace House and to meet our fellows and to gain from the experienced journalists who we bring to the campus. I also want to thank, we have some people who come to our events all the time. Regent Kathy White is here in the front row, and this is our last public event of the year. And we start our event season every year with something called the Hovey Lecture in the back gardens at Wallace House. And Regent White, who's from Ann Arbor, was there at that first event, and I remember like it was yesterday looking out, and it was September, and there she was smiling from the front row, and here we are. It's March, the academic year is almost over, and she's here again, so thank you for coming out to support us, and all the rest of you who have been to many of our events over the course of the year. So as I said, this particular event is to honor Charles Eisendrath. When Charles was building this program, one of the things that he baked into the DNA of Wallace House philosophy and the way we work is a real respect for the role of international reporting and international journalism. Every year when we bring fellows to the university in our class, there's roughly 18 to 20 fellows here every year. 6 to 8 of those are international journalists coming from all over the world. And the Livingston Awards, which awards journalists under 35 for excellence in reporting, one of those is for international reporting. Charles came to run the program himself from being an international correspondent. I too have that in my background, and among the many things we share about our outlook on journalism is that belief that even if audiences act like they don't want news from around the world, we know that it's important, and we know that it's important to advocate for it being present in the newspapers we read and the magazines, and squeezing room through whatever is going on cable television at any given moment for real news from around the world. And so Charles Eisendrath, I would love if you would come up and say a few words.
I would like to say a few words. The first word is thank you for coming. Thank you for representing the age range that you do. It's wonderful to see graduate students, and who knows, postgraduate people like myself, I see some of those in the audience, turn out for this affair, even though God knows I'm no Ronan Farrell.
What?
Thank you for coming anyway. About international reporting and the threat to freedom of expression. In my era, which was reporting from the late 60s early through the 70s and thereon, it was a different world. There was absolutely no question about freedom of expression in this country. That was just rock solid assumed. My main concern was for others, for people working abroad with none of the protections that I enjoyed, none of the attitudes that I enjoyed. That began to change just right when I was in my assignments abroad. What did that mean? It meant that you notice in this logo, I had nothing to do with this logo, but you notice the bullet holes in that sign. One of the things I talk a little bit about in this book, which I'm shamelessly flogging here, although it's not on sale yet, is censorship by submachine gun, which began specifically in 1973, September 11th, in Santiago de Chile. I'd never seen it before. No one else had. The spokesman came out to address the press, and he said, "I'd like to speak with you, gentlemen." We were all men in those days. And he took very ostentatiously, took his Uzi and put it on that side of the microphone. He said, "There, now we're ready to talk." The first question was, what will you do if we say anything that you, the new Chilean junta, don't like? Will you throw us out? And he said, "No, we will do the opposite." That was chilling. It's almost impossible to get out of Chile unless you have a ship or a plane. The mountains on one side and nothing else but a desert and an ocean on the others. So that was my impetus in concentrating on freedom of expression internationally when I came to the University of Michigan in both the Livingston Awards and the fellowships. And Lynette has made it stick in a wonderful way. Today we have representation from Afghanistan, the Middle East, and now, most of all chilling, threats to press freedom in this country. You'll hear from all of them. I can't stress how important it is that we all keep an eye on this and realize that if we're not careful, we will become a totally different kind of country. And that's what we're going to explore today. Thank you.
As you came in and were seated, hopefully you received question cards. After the panel has a conversation here, we're going to open it up and invite questions from the audience. When you fill out your question, if you simply raise your hand, someone will be watching. We'll come and collect your cards. We have 2 Knight-Wallace fellows here, Kath Mackey from the BBC and AJ Vicens from Mother Jones, who are going to be monitoring questions. And when we open up to questions, they'll pose the questions to our panel and to our moderator. For those of you who are following us by live stream, we are also inviting questions on Twitter. You can tweet your questions to us using the hashtag #WallaceHouse. And even if you're in the room and you want to use Twitter, we will be following it and we'll make sure that your questions are worked in. Now I'd like to turn it over to Len Niehoff, who is going to be moderating for us. If you watched the information that was streaming behind us here, just some of the really chilling statistics from the past year. Certainly, journalists who work in conflict zones being a journalist has always been dangerous. And one of the things we're here to talk about today is how it's gotten more dangerous around the world in recent years, and what are the various factors that are contributing to that. And as Charles indicated, to talk about the United States and what role we're playing in making it a more dangerous environment in which to practice journalism. Len Niehoff is a First Amendment scholar, a legal scholar, a media expert, and the perfect person to lead this discussion. We have the bios of all of our participants in your programs, and so I'm not going to read them here. I will just invite Len up to take over, and thank you for coming.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Lynette, thank you for your kind introduction, for the invitation to moderate this panel, and for your wonderful leadership of the Knight-Wallace program, which I view as one of the crown jewels of our university community. Before we get underway, I would be remiss if I did not mention how much it means to me to moderate a panel named for my dear friend Charles Eisendrath. My affection for Charles is matched only by my respect for him. As you all know, he has many titles, but his real title is Philosopher of the Possible. Throughout his career, Charles has dreamed dreams that he had no business dreaming, and indeed no small dream has ever found a comfortable home in Charles Eisendrath's head. And against all the odds, he has relentlessly and consistently made all those dreams into reality. And then, like some sort of bow-tied shaman, he showed the rest of us how to do it too, and we're all in his debt for it. You're welcome, Charles. We have a lot to do today, and we have very big questions. Just this week, a news source that I have that sends me recent developments on media law and on the media had these headlines. This is in one issue on one day. Honduras, journalist shot dead in southern Honduras. Nicaragua, how Nicaragua is waging war on journalists. Russia criminalizes the spread of online news which disrespects the government. South Korean ruling party's treatment of Bloomberg reporter stokes press freedom concerns. Those are the headlines from one day. We have lots of big questions to answer. Fortunately, we have a fabulous panel to help us do it. To my immediate right, Vanessa Gezari is senior editor at The Intercept and is an instructor at the Columbia Journalism Review. She is an alum of the Knight-Wallace program in 2012, I believe, and we're delighted that she can be here with us. To Vanessa's right is Itai Anghel, and he is a Knight-Wallace Fellow this year. He's a documentary filmmaker working with Channel 2 of Israeli TV. Itai, thank you so much for being here today. To Itai's right is Jawad Sukhanyar, a Knight-Wallace Fellow also this year with the New York Times, and working a great deal with issues in Afghanistan. To start things off, what I've asked the panelists to do is give us about 3 or 4 minutes of an opening statement. When they think of this phrase and this issue, what are the concerns that come to mind for them? I should warn you that I am accustomed to moderating panels full of lawyers and law professors who can be voluble, and so I am accustomed to having to interrupt people. In order to keep us moving, I'm going to apologize in advance to any of our panelists, not only if, but when I interrupt you to keep things moving, but I hope you'll do a little self-policing to help me along. So, Jessica, if we could begin with you, just talk for a few minutes about what is on your mind when you think about this phrase.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? It sounds like it. Thank you, Len, for that introduction. Thank you, Lynette and the Knight-Wallace Fellowship for arranging this, and to all of you for coming, and to Charles Eisendrath for just existing and having brought this whole thing into being. Those were great remarks about Charles. I'm not going to try to top that, so we'll leave it there. I agree. Charles has never had a dream that he hasn't realized. I think it's incredible. So I just want to talk for a second here about the United States. A lot of what you're going to hear in this panel is about the world, and that's important, obviously. And the threats to journalists around the world are growing and are worse than they are here. But I noticed, looking at the Committee to Protect Journalists figures on deaths of journalists over the last 25, 26 years since they've been keeping these records, that last year in the United States, we had 4 journalists killed in the Capitol Gazette shooting. Now, I see in your program it says 5, and so the number I saw in CPJ was 4. I might be wrong about that, and we can fact check that later. But it's either 4 or 5, and that number, yeah? Perfect. Okay, great. So neither one of us is wrong. So 4 reporters were killed, and that, I guess one thing I want to say is sort of like, just give you a context for that. Since 1992, up until 2018, only 7 journalists had been killed in connection with their work in the United States. In 2018, 4 were killed in this shooting by someone who apparently filed a defamation lawsuit against the paper that was unsuccessful. And so you can look at that as well. It's like one-off violent event. Is it a fluke? Is it a coincidence that this happened? It makes a huge change in the numbers. It's a more than 50% increase over the previous 25 years when CPJ was keeping these numbers. And I would suggest to you that it's not just a fluke or a one-off thing that this happened. It's happening at a moment when we have a president who is, certainly in my lifetime, the most vocally anti-press leader we've ever had, and perhaps ever. I think, people would talk about Nixon. There are other leaders we've had who have certainly called the press into question. I think Donald Trump has gone further than that, in publicly deriding journalists. And, you have to think back to his supporters with the posters of, rope tree journalist in the rallies. So this is a new level of threat to the press in terms of rhetoric from what we've seen before. One of the ways that this shows up in a more sort of direct way for journalists, although it's not as visible to the public, is in leak investigations. And I just want to sort of talk a little bit about that, because investigating sources and journalists sources who leak and journalists who publish classified information really sort of started happening under the Obama administration. But it has taken off in the Trump administration. And in 2017, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions said there are more than 3 times as many leak investigations going on now as there were at the end of the Obama administration. And we've seen already, several people go to jail for these, for leaking classified information to the press over the last couple of years. I work as a national security editor at an investigative news site, and it's getting increasingly difficult for us to get people to tell us what's happening inside the government, information that the government doesn't want out. More and more information is classified, and less of it is available to us. Surveillance is being used at an increasing level, everything from tracking reporters and sources down to the metadata on their phones to try to figure out who's talking to who. And Donald Trump has even gone so far as to suggest that journalists themselves should really be jailed for publishing information that the government considers secret, which would be a very big and new step for us. So I think it's just worth noting that even for those of us who believe that the government should be able to keep some information secret, I hope we can agree that there are many far greater threats to national security, from climate change to nuclear war, than journalists trying to get information into the public domain so that citizens and voters can make good decisions about how they want their country to look.
Thank you, Vanessa. Itai.
Hey, thank you, Len. Thank you, Lynette, Charles, Wallace House, for bringing me here. 2 weeks from now, election will be held in Israel, crucial elections. And for the first time, for many, many, many years, there is a chance for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to go out. Now, one of the most dominant posters in the campaign of the leading Likud party of Benjamin Netanyahu is a poster where you see 4 portraits of 4 Israeli prominent journalists, and below it reads, "They will not decide." They, the journalists, will not decide, with exclamation mark, and then vote Bibi. As if let's join forces together with Bibi against the enemies. Journalists happen to be part of these enemies. So on one hand, I feel a bit flattered that the Israeli press is so vibrant and makes an effect. On the other hand, it's not easy. You're being regarded more and more as like a fifth column in the state of Israel. And as we will talk about it a little more in this panel, I know this state as well feel the same unease. As for myself, most of my work I do outside the state of Israel. I've been covering mainly world conflicts all over the world. I began in 1991 in Croatia, then it came Bosnia, Serbia, and Kosovo. I've been to the genocide in Rwanda in '94, dozens other places in Africa, mainly Congo, the civil war there. Then came Haiti, Chechnya, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And then it came to my neighborhood in the Middle East. I've been to Gaza working a lot, in Lebanon. And I'm talking about the Middle East revolution. It began in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, but my main work in recent years has been in Syria and in Iraq. I'm an Israeli. I'm working for the Israeli television. And what I try to do is to bring Israelis who often, unfortunately, succumb to stereotypes that anyone beyond our border is a pure enemy. I would like to bring them a different view of what is really happening outside, because no one is going there, and I'm going there. So I try to make a change. Israel has enemies it has to defend itself from. But a part of these enemies, you have politics of fear in the Middle East, in Israel, and all over. We try to blind people from seeing the other. All my life I've been trying, to show what is the other in my documentary and in my lecture in the university. And I gotta tell you, in recent years it become more and more of a challenge. It becomes difficult. People are less open all over the world. 2 cases, unfortunately, that I have to mention that affect my life and made me rethink about my profession. I lost quite a few colleagues over the years. November 2012, it was my first entrance inside Syria, and in the region of Idlib. And a few kilometers from the path I took, there was a colleague of mine, a friend, who took another path. His name is James Foley. James Foley later on was abducted. Then he was beheaded. Some of my fellows, some of my colleagues were killed because of a crossfire. And when you take the risk as a journalist, you know that it can happen to you. But some of them were targeted. James Foley, one of them. At the same year, another friend, good friend, his name is Remy Oshlik, French photographer. We've been working together in Tahrir Square during the revolution in Egypt. He went to Syria, to a city of Homs, along with American journalist, maybe the best war zone correspondent, Mary Colvin. And they set a press house in the city of Homs in order to arrange, events and try to tell the world what is happening there, because it was very difficult to bring things out. They did a mistake. They called it a press house. Once they declared that this is a press house, within minutes it was bombed. Remy Oshlik was killed. Mary Colvin was killed immediately. You mentioned that you are press, you want to tell the story of this place, you are being targeted. So killing, assassination is the worst But I'm troubled now, but even less dramatic things like the vibes, I would call it. You know, for me as a journalist, and the vibes in a lot of countries, in my country, in this country, that make me feel at unease. You know, I don't know how far along we would be able to do and to perform this job that we are doing, but more than ever, I feel that like too many people would like to regard us as an enemy, as a fifth column.
Thank you, Itai. Jawad, what's on your mind?
Good afternoon. It's a great honor to be on this panel. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Julia. And thank you, Lynette. So I guess I would start my talk with this, with a question, how do I do my work in Afghanistan? When my neighbors ask me, where do you work? I just tell them I work for the government. And then when they go ahead and ask me, what do you do in the government? Then I try to pause and change the topic. I tell them, well, I don't want to tell you. This has been my story as a journalist in the past several years in my own country, even though I work for the New York Times. And I do that because...
Jawad, can I ask you to move a little closer to the microphone? We're having a little trouble hearing you.
I do that because, you know, it's a safety matter for me, and this is the truth. As an Afghan journalist working in my own country, I'm not alone. Other journalists who work for international outlets do the same. For example, when I introduce myself with someone that I interview, most of the time I do not tell them that I work for an American outlet like the New York Times. And this is a safety matter. The reason I do that is because, you know, the Afghans had a bad experience of the foreign invasions and interventions in their country. And the moment they hear that you work for an American outlet, whether you're a journalist or an NGO worker, they would not like it. They would try to avoid you, and, you know, they would think that you're a spy or someone working in the interest of foreigners, not your own country. So this is how I do my work, and it has been the truth. I don't say that no one really knows what I do. My family and my close friends knows about my work, that I am a journalist for the New York Times. But in public, ordinary Afghans, that's the perception, and, you know, they don't like to hear someone saying that they work with the Westerners or with an American outlet. So yeah, I'll just go to the censorship. You know, censorship exists in Afghanistan. I guess since there is a war, an ongoing war, the top secret is the casualties. Whenever there is a bombing or an attack and we want to cover that, we have trouble finding the accurate figures, and the government always tries to just hide the accurate numbers. Even though we try to find our way, get on the ground or talk to the people and find something that's closer to the reality, but then, you know, this is one of the problems, and it has been an issue recently because the casualties, the NSF casualties has been, I mean, going high, and, you know, it's a challenge for us as a journalist. Normally when we write a story, we have different figures, and we want to have that because, you know, we cannot rely on one source that gives us one figure, because we know that it will always change. And when that happens and we do something and we find something that's close to what the government figures are, then the government gets upset to us. And then what they can do is that they block our access. For example, there are secret off-the-record press briefings. They just block us from attending those briefings, and this is another issue. So the other thing is the imprisonment. I don't know if there is anyone imprisoned in Afghanistan, any journalist in prison in Afghanistan because of what they have reported, but there was a couple of cases in the past years, and that wasn't really anything to do with the freedom of press. It was like those journalists had different other issues. So right now there's no journalist imprisoned. I've checked this, and which is something good. And to the last thing, the murder. I would like to tell you that Afghanistan is, as you all know, is the deadliest place to be a journalist, and this has been proven that 2017 and 2018 were the deadliest. 2017, we had about 20 journalists and media workers killed, and 2018 it was 17, which is a big number. This includes both foreign journalists and Afghan journalists. So yeah, and regarding to my talk, I talked to a couple of my journalist friends in Pakistan and India and got what they have been witnessing in their own countries. Here, I'm going to read what my friend Sanjay Kumar, who's a journalist based in New Delhi, said about threat to freedom of press. In India, the press freedom has come under attack not only from the Hindu majoritarian government since 2014, but also from the corporate world, which now owns a majority chunk of media industry. This is what he said at the beginning, and then I'll read another. This is what he said about a recent incident between Pakistan and India on Kashmir. The recent report on Indo-Pak conflict in the larger media was so jingoistic that people all across India were swayed by this kind of reporting. It created a war hysteria, which suits the ruling Hindu party, BJP. So yeah, and in case of Pakistan, I would just tell you something that I remember from one of my colleagues that I talked to him. He said that there is press freedom in Pakistan, only that when you're in a press club or somewhere indoor and you're safe. The moment you leave the press club, there's no guarantee that you will be safe. And that's how press freedom is treated in that country, which is my neighbor. So I think I will stop here, and then if there was any question, I would be happy to.
So let me follow up with an initial question. The Committee to Protect Journalists, we've referred to some of the data here, and this organization is called 2018 the deadliest year for press in recent years. More than 250 journalists imprisoned around the world, at least 53 journalists killed on the job. Vanessa's made reference to certain language that's been used, the enemy of the people, fake news, so forth and so on. And there's a risk that we're talking here about actually lots of different things with different causes, or it might be that we're talking about things that have sort of shared causes. And I'd like to get your, and I think Itai, I'd like to start with you if that's okay. Are we looking at one phenomenon? Is there a monolithic explanation for what's going on globally? Or is this just a coincidence of a number of different factors going on in different places?
I think there are quite a few. To begin with, I think there are many, many journalists nowadays. A lot of freelance journalists, a lot of people who decide, on their behalf, that I'm a journalist and I'm taking photos, for example. Again, when I began my work in 91 or 92 in Bosnia, we were quite a few. I mean, we told the story that if we had not been there, people wouldn't know what is happening there, apart from the headline, a war in Bosnia. Now you don't need me or anyone else to know that in Syria there is a war and there are atrocities. A lot of people over there, and when there are a lot of people in a war zone, and freelancers, people who try their luck, tend to be less careful when they're going into very dangerous places. A lot of people in dangerous places, more people will get hurt. Second, think about the countries that we are going to talk about today. We talk about Turkey, Erdogan in Turkey. We talk about Duterte in the Philippines. We talk about Bolsonaro in Brazil. And I mentioned these three at the beginning because these are democratically elected head of state who are stating that we don't like journalists, that we hate journalists, that journalists are enemies, and they are being elected because, you know, the people like it. They like this kind of attitude. Yeah, journalists are bad. We can go on to Khashoggi in Saudi Arabia, we can go to Sudan, but these are democratic countries. So the vibe is really, really terrible in that sense. Last thing that I would like to mention in this regard, again, it's something personal that I feel. You know, you take a chance and you take a risk by going into war zones. But I always got a sense, you know, that people appreciate me or my colleagues coming over there in order to tell their story. They know that we are taking quite a risk. So you're being appreciated and respected. It still happens in quite a lot of places, but more and more war zones, it is absolutely different. I mean, people regard you, while you're a journalist, as a dollar bill. I can make money, you know, by kidnapping this guy, by selling it to some organization. And this is a better opportunity for me. Like, I don't have a lot of respect, or I don't have a lot of things to gain from this guy telling my story. So I know from my work, from my colleagues' work, that, you know, you think twice and even more before going to places as you used to before.
You know, it's quite possible that these numbers are understated, right? There might be all sorts of reasons, as horrific as these numbers are, to believe that these are actually seriously understated numbers.
Numbers are something that you should regard, I don't know, very cautiously. I mean, I've been involved in a project to help raped women in Congo. The official number in Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, which is notoriously known as the world's capital of raping women, is 1,000 women being raped per day. Everybody know, but everybody know that it is way more than 1,000. I mean, Congo is the size of like 2/3 of Europe. 1,000 are the numbers who are being reported. Now go figure what is happening. So the figure of the journalists are, I can say, you know, obviously it is way, way, way higher than what we know and what we mention here.
But you look like you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, I wanted to add up something here. Well, the CPJ report that comes out, I guess it was 53 journalists in 2018. I don't think that's the accurate number. I don't blame them for that. Maybe they haven't got all the figures. But, I mean, let's talk about Afghanistan. The figures they have about from Afghanistan is 13 journalists killed in 2018, whereas the figures I got from journalist committees in Afghanistan shows a different. It's 17 journalists who were killed in Afghanistan in 2018. So I guess that may not be, that the figure they have is not inaccurate. And I think it applies with other countries as well, maybe because they don't get the accurate figures on time. It takes them time to investigate and find out and then confirm that and then put that on their list. For example, for 2019, which we're in March, it's only 3 months, there were 4 journalists killed in Afghanistan, but the CPJ list shows only 1. This means they only had the report for 1 journalist killed in Afghanistan. There were there was one incident in northern Afghanistan. 2 journalists, local journalists were killed. There was one in south, and there was one in eastern Afghanistan. So these are like reported nationally in Afghanistan, but you don't see them on CPJ reports.
Well, when we were talking about this the other day, Vanessa made a point that I thought was really excellent, which was there's a definitional issue here, too, about who qualifies as a journalist. And so if you're not counting bloggers, if you're not counting people who are gathering, you know, disseminating information in certain ways, you could seriously understate the numbers in that sense. Vanessa, I wanted to come back to something you said at the beginning, and that dovetails with one of Charles's observations, which is that for most of at least recent memory, we've had the luxury of thinking that this is a phenomenon that, you know, might exist in Saudi Arabia or South Sudan or Turkey or Mexico or Colombia or other places, but certainly there was nothing to worry about here. And you referred to the language that the president has used around the enemy of the people, which has a sort of sinister, well, not a sort of, a very sinister history associated with it. The concept of fake news, which interestingly he claims to have invented, which is itself a fake claim, but anyway. But I wondered, so what, we believe in the power of words, right? That's what we do. How are these words, do you think, affecting the global conversation, the global treatment of journalists?
Well, it's interesting. When Trump came into office, I was working at Columbia Journalism Review at the university, at Columbia University, and we talked a lot about this whole idea that Trump's rhetoric, his anti-press rhetoric during the campaign and when he came into office, like what kind of impact was that really going to have? And there were a lot of people who said, you know, and I've heard this since from a lot of journalists, that they don't really think what he says has that big an impact. I disagree. I think that now that we're a couple years into this presidency, it's pretty clear that, you know, he's the most important, the President of the United States is the most important person on earth in a lot of ways, and what he says really resonates. So in thinking about this, I mean, most of you will be familiar with Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi dissident and columnist for the Washington Post, who was killed in the Saudi embassy in Turkey last fall. And I want to talk about that for a little bit because it's not, his killing is not that unusual, right? Saudi Arabia is run by, right now, an autocratic crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who has made it very clear that he doesn't want anybody, certainly not any Saudi, saying anything negative about Saudi Arabia. And Saudi dissidents all around the world have been tracked and in some cases harmed because of what they've said. What's amazing about this killing is that, you know, it happened in the Saudi embassy in Turkey, and some people in the Saudi government sent a plane load of people to Turkey to go into the embassy, including a doctor with a bone saw, to either detain and kidnap or kill this dissident, this journalist, and then flew home a few hours later. And, you know, many of you in the audience will know this, but every embassy is highly surveilled. Every embassy is bugged. If you've ever seen any spy movies, you know that they're constantly sweeping for bugs in those places. So this was essentially like killing Jamal Khashoggi in a public street, okay? It's very clear that this is not going to be a secret event. So why would anyone do this? When you look at what the White House, sort of the White House statement that was issued, what Donald Trump said about this event afterwards was, he said, "This is terrible, but the Saudi regime has told me that they consider Jamal Khashoggi an enemy of the state and a member of the Muslim Brotherhood." So you can hear the echo there, enemy of the people, enemy of the state, right? And, you know, they're two different things, but he's using this, he's saying, you know, maybe the Saudi regime knew about this killing, maybe they didn't. We're not going to make a decision about that, but we stand with Saudi Arabia. So I think it has a huge impact.
You know, I want to connect a couple dots here that you've raised, because there's a lot of things going on here. So the Khashoggi case got a tremendous amount of attention, and in part because of the film, of the video that shows him going up to the embassy and so forth and so on, and because of the graphic nature of the crime and so forth and so on. So we have this potential turning point, right, with respect to this horrific event. And surveillance is this other theme, right? That we have these tapes, he's under surveillance. And, you know, it was interesting to me, in January of this year, Gene Policinski of the Freedom Forum wrote this piece about the threat to press freedom from surveillance. That the idea that we're all now in any major city under more or less constant surveillance makes it harder to gather news, increases the risk to sources, makes it harder for journalists to move around the world in ways that they have in the past. And you could argue that we've sort of stood the world we used to have on its head. That it used to be that it was hard to get information about the press and easier to get information about the government. And now it's easier to get information about the press and harder to get information about the government. So I just want to open it up to Itai and Jawad also to comment on the Khashoggi case and also on this phenomenon of surveillance and to what degree you think that's inhibiting what you do.
I guess I will go first. Well, the surveillance is an issue for us in Afghanistan in the sense that whatever we do is under surveillance of both the government and the coalition forces based in Afghanistan. Like I could say, our telephones, our calls are tapped, our emails, I guess, are read. So we have no means of communication between us and our sources that we feel is safe. So it definitely has an impact on what we do. In the sense that there are stories that we really like to do and we try our best, but then we also need to think about the safety of our sources. If our source is a government employee or official, it's very hard for us to reach out that source in a way that we protect his identity, and as well as our identity is important, because there are stories that we want to do, especially myself as an Afghan, that I don't want to be named. I don't want to get the credit, the byline or the tagline, because I'm afraid that my life will be in danger after the story is out or published. So it is an issue in Afghanistan, and it's something that hinders us from doing our work in many ways, and I think that's something that is, it's an important issue. I just do want to say something.
Anything to add, or you?
About Khashoggi or about the surveillance? Well, about the surveillance, I mentioned the first time I entered Syria, and it was like by, it sounds a weird sentence, by mistake. My intention was to talk to Syrian refugees in Turkey, and we became friends. And then he explained to me, one of the refugees, listen, we are having food here, we are getting ammunition, energy, and going back to fight in Syria. Oh yeah, how do you do it? Yeah, it's very easy, to cross through the patrol. Like imagine an old espionage movie, you wait for the patrol to pass, and you get inside. And me as an Israeli, we close our country so tight. What? And then, can you get me in? Yeah, I can get you in now. Okay, I can get inside Syria. I'm an Israeli who might get inside Syria. So my first, instinct was it's very reckless thing to do. And when I think a bit more, no, it's the only safe way to get inside, because like you were saying, it is impossible for me now to plan a trip to Syria. I know that emails will be tracked. I know that, phone calls, satellite phone calls will be tracked. And all of a sudden I have a situation in which I didn't plan it. Nobody knows that I'm about to enter it. So let's keep it that way. Nobody knows. Not phone call involved, not email. That was like my first incentive to go inside, because I take, into consideration that nowadays, especially when you're going to these places, people try to listen to you and to talk to you. So I had like a golden opportunity to enter without anyone knowing that I'm on my way inside.
Do you want us to, I have about 3 weeks worth of questions here. That's what I do for a living. Do you want me to, do you want to see if there are audience questions, or you want me to keep going?
I want you to keep going, but just a reminder that we have Rachel and Vanessa and some Jim collecting cards. So if you've written a question on the card, raise your hand. They'll pick it up from you and bring it down.
So, you mentioned Turkey, and it's my understanding that Turkey can claim the prize as the world's leading jailer of journalists. And so I'd like to imagine sort of a hypothetical with you. We have a journalist who has been jailed in Turkey, presumably has been jailed pursuant to the Turkish legal system, so there's actually no legal recourse. For purposes of Turkish law, he is a lawfully, or she is a lawfully detained journalist. What, if anything, under those circumstances can be done to secure release or to make things better? If you don't have legal recourse, and if there isn't the kind of international pressure that there used to be, I think that we have to ask ourselves, have we arrived at a point where asking people to perform certain kinds of journalism is tantamount to asking them to be martyrs? And so is there anything that can be done for someone who finds themselves in a situation like that?
Well, my answer is not easy. In most of the cases, forget about him. I mean, Turkey, I mean, it's like the biggest anti-press campaign in recent history. Since 2016, 16 TV channels were shut down. More than 40 newspapers, I think the number is 46. 26 radio stations. You got close to 300, and again, we're talking about numbers, probably it's more, are being in jail. Now, from those who are in jail, some of them are just disappeared. I have a lot of colleagues, Turkeys, but mainly Kurdish in Turkey, that disappeared. No one really knows. We heard that he's in jail, but nothing of his whereabouts. I think there is a lot of hypocrisy over there because we've been talking about Khashoggi, and it is a clear cut. I mean, nothing can be cruel like, murdering and cutting a man into pieces. It happened inside Turkey. And President Erdogan, he was outraged, because nothing can take place in Turkey, nothing like that. But not only the murder itself, but, hurting a journalist. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is a guy, who putting, people and journalists to jail like no other leader in the world. And he trying, so I think it is something that you have to recognize with all due respect. You can try and try and try, and they will never go out. If they are international, there is a chance. But I think in Wallace House, we have like something which is like a rare example that Wallace House has been done, in trying to help a journalist, Emilio Gutierrez from Mexico, and the efforts that are being done. And we have connection, we have good people, we have Lynette, but it's on the verge of heart attack, trying to save it. And we are on our way, and it's not like a success to begin with, but with such an effort, for people who have the power, which is so difficult. So over there in Turkey, the question is tough. The answer, I think, is even worse. You can forget about some of the people. You can shout as much as you like, but you won't hear about their whereabouts.
I think this raises a related question, which is one of the things that under certain circumstances you would hope would help would be public outrage. But of course, you're only going to get public outrage if the public thinks favorably of the press and of the media. And there are all sorts of statistics about this. This one from the Freedom Forum found that in 2018, in their State of the First Amendment report, that 74% of Americans believe that the media plays an important watchdog role with respect to the government, which interestingly is up from 68% during the time when the president is saying all of these things we discussed earlier. But Vanessa, how should we view, since we're being skeptical of numbers today, that seems to be the theme, should we be skeptical of these numbers too, or how do we think about how the public thinks about us?
Yeah, the numbers are all over the place on this. And I actually am, again, going to name drop Columbia Journalism Review because their latest issue is called How They See Us. And it's all about how the press is perceived by people in the United States. And as part of this, they commissioned a poll where they asked a bunch of people this question, which, normally is not asked in polls because polls are not about what people think about journalists. But, some of the most interesting numbers out of this poll that I think are remarkable, and when it comes to confidence in institutions, the top one with the most confidence is the military, followed by law enforcement, universities, the Supreme Court, and importantly, the executive branch of the government. The press comes after that. And then at the very bottom is Congress. So, just sit with that for a second. Another one I found really interesting is where do people get their news? 40% said they get it from television, 28% from online, the internet. What's the difference? 12% from social media, and only 6% from print magazines and newspapers. 5% from radio. And one that I personally thought was also incredible, 60% of all respondents, 54% of Democrats and 70% of Republicans, believe reporters get paid by their sources sometimes or very often. Okay? So basically we're in a situation where I wouldn't say that faith in the press is at its lowest ebb in this country, but it's pretty low. Because historically we've seen this go up and down. But I think it makes a really big difference. And one of the things we've seen in the United States is just how polarizing this is and how people pay attention to their news source. So if it's Fox News that you believe, you tend to watch it all the time and believe everything they say. If it's MSNBC, that'll be the one you watch all the time and you believe everything they say. And it's been said over and over again, but you can't, as a news consumer, it's very difficult to be responsible, and to be responsible in that regard, you have to look at different news outlets and look at what different kinds of journalistic organs from all over the world are saying about something, and check yourself.
So can I ask a question? So what you're suggesting is that the numbers are probably actually overstated, that there's probably more reason to be skeptical, and the numbers are sort of all over the place. I want to ask you a question, though. So I belong to a profession that also doesn't win many popularity contests, but it's been my experience over the years that people tend to not like lawyers, but like their lawyer. They think their lawyer is a wonderful person. It's lawyers generally that they're skeptical of. And I wonder if there's a corollary with the media, where people might be skeptical of the media, but think of certain personalities within the media, or certain reporters or certain journalists, as people with whom they almost have a relationship of trust. Years ago, I represented 60 Minutes in a case in Detroit, and Ed Bradley and I would occasionally be walking down the street of Detroit, and people would run up to him and say hello to him, not like he was a celebrity, but like he was a guest in their house every Sunday night. Let me ask you, do you think there are personalities out there where if we said, do you trust so-and-so, that we would get higher results? Or are we in a different place nationally in the sense that there are no sort of cross-party journalists with credibility? In other words, you might like your Fox person or you might like your MSNBC person, but there's nobody who is sort of spanning the gap. Any thoughts about any of that?
Very interesting. I think the world became so much complicated, and it's not black and white. And, a normal human being, a thinking human being, would have a dissonance in his head. I mean, things are complicated, and you have to think, and you have to reflect, and you have to go in depth. And I think for most of the people, unfortunately, it's much more convenient to have good guys, bad guys, to have black and white. I know in my country it is. I know in this country it is. And I think this is one of the sickness of journalism in here. If you like Fox, you will be Fox all your life. MSNBC, on the other hand. Now, me as a journalist, I think it is awful on both sides because I see morning, afternoon, evening, after midnight, people speaking in studios, only in studios. They speak about places they've never been in. They're commentating and making interpretation about people they never met. They look good. They have nice jackets. They have nice suits. They have like the tie. They have nice makeup, the white hair, the knock on the table. I mean, absolutely opinionated, and they phrase themselves much better than I am. But they've never been outside. For me, it's absolutely crazy. I mean, this is really abnormal. I have no other way to say it. Regardless whether you're on the left, you're on the right, I mean, these people never went out. They know how to speak, but they never went out. And I hope, that people understand it more and more. And I hope, that the next generation of journalists, and I know it from young people who would like to be journalists, to do field work, to go there and to show how things really look like from within. Because the way I see it, you gotta work quite a lot in a place, and you have to be in a place, not for, one day to make a stand-up and to run away. You gotta be at least for a few weeks or a few months until you open your mouth and say something about the place. If you're in the studio, and that's the way people prefer the news, I mean, of course you will have this data. I mean, I'm not impressed as well, from this kind of journalism.
But you talked earlier about your conversations with people in journalists in so many different countries. And the comments that you relayed to us were mostly about how they perceive their freedom vis-a-vis the government. How they think about the constraints on them that are being imposed by the government. In these conversations, do you have a sense about whether journalists internationally nevertheless feel supported by the people? In other words, regardless of what the official government policy is, do you have a sense that internationally journalists still feel that the people are behind them and that popular outrage on their behalf might be possible?
Well, I think I would like to talk about India. In India, this is what I got from my friends who are based in India. They say that if you're a journalist nowadays, you're either a cheerleader of the current administration in power, or you're scared of the regime that's in power. So this means that if you write something that's free and that's accurate, but it's something that the government doesn't like it shows their weaknesses, they try to come after you, and they try to come after you not directly, but they would make people to come after you. Like they will start trolling you online. This has been the case in India. Like there was a killing in 2017. Famous Indian journalist was killed, Gauri Lankesh. So no one was arrested in her murder case so far. It has been like 3 years. She was a liberal. She was telling the truth. She was never afraid of the current government. So, I mean, before she was killed, she was trolled online. Then she was killed. And, you know, it's not that people randomly went after her and trolled her or harassed her and then someone killed her. It's, you know, I mean, people believe that there has been something between what she has done and the government didn't like that. And that's why, you know, she got killed. And I think 4 journalists were killed in the past 3-4 years, if I'm not mistaken, in India. Imagine, India is not like Afghanistan. It's not like the United States either. So things happen, and media outlets, especially the newspaper industry, really relies on ads from the government. If you write something that's against the government's policies and shows that the government hasn't done enough, then what they do is that they cut the ads and then you slowly die. I mean, you can't sustain. For example, to buy 1 copy of a newspaper, it costs 3 Indian rupees. But for the print, it costs you 20 rupees. I don't know how much that is in dollars, but see the difference. I mean, you only make money from the ads that the government pays you for, and you run those ads. And if they cut those ads, it means you cannot survive. This has been the same with individual journalists. Like if you're speaking your mind and trying to be liberal and moderate, then what they would do is that they would, I mean, come after you online and then threaten you, and then if not, then they would find a way to make you like quit your job. For example, I mean, look, there is an Indian journalist, Barka Dat. She was forced to quit her job. I think she got another job, but I don't know. I mean, exactly which media she's working now, but I mean, she was harassed online, and then, yeah, I mean, after that, 4 people were arrested, but, you know, those arrests doesn't make any sense because, you know, if you are not showing allegiance, I should say, to the current administration, it will be hard for you to survive. And the same in Afghanistan. Whenever you write a story as a journalist, that's something that shows like a weakness of the government. They cannot come and arrest you, but they can force you to apologize. They can force you to run a correction. And if you don't do that, then they block your way. They block the access that you would have as a journalist. And once they do that, then, you know, it's hard to work. So the only thing you can do is that you have to be careful and resort to self-censorship because, you know, at the end of the day, it's a risky profession, at least in Afghanistan. And whatever you do it has its risks. So, yeah, I don't know if I made my point clear, but that's how it is. I think the people are supporting the free press, at least in Afghanistan. Let me give you an example of how Afghans see this. Well, more than half of the Afghans are under the age of 25. That means they don't really remember a time that there was no freedom of press. I don't say that there is an absolute freedom of press, because it's not that way. But then that means they've seen the media talking about issues, public issues that matters in their life. So they support free press, but then they're not always like, I mean, it's not them who decides what's happening. It's the politician, it's the government. Like in the recent years, we see the spokespersons or spokespeople of the, let's say, the president's office coming after journalists, individual journalists online. If you write a story, no matter it's true, he will come after you. They will come after you online. He will try to say things that will make you look bad, and even though you're just telling the truth, that's your job. But there's less tolerance toward what you want to say as a free, as someone working, in the media.
I want to connect something that your earlier observation was something that Vanessa said earlier. You know, there's this, you can argue that there is this, in many countries, this sort of natural impulse or unnatural impulse to suppress free expression, to suppress the media. And there's a kind of hydraulics to this. If you prohibit it here, it's not like it goes away, it just finds another place to relocate, right? So in this country, we have a very strong prior restraint doctrine that makes it very, very hard for the government to stop anything from being printed. And particularly with the internet, it's physically and practically impossible in many instances anyway. But if you can't do that, the natural shift is to go over and try and cut off sources of the news and do the censorship at the front end of the process, which I think helps explain the increase in leak prosecutions that you're describing. And so I think one of the phenomena you're describing here is that if a government has concluded that it at least has to make noises about free expression, it may not be putting people in jail, but it may be approaching people on the side and threatening them, telling them they need to issue retractions or to take a story back or take a story down off the internet. So there's a sort of, there's this process where the pressure doesn't go away, it just relocates. Does that seem fair?
Well, let me say something here. Our former president, President Hamid Karzai, had a hard time coping with the New York Times. He didn't like the reports published at the New York Times up until 2014. One of my colleagues, Matthew Rosenberg, who is now based in DC, wrote a story in August 2014 about the possible coup in Afghanistan. The president had a hard time with the New York Times. He didn't like our stories, the stories that leaked issues that made him look not the way he wanted to. But then what he did was that since he knew that it was hard for him to come after my colleague, he expelled my colleague from Afghanistan. He gave him 24 hours ultimatum and sort of like forced him to leave the country. He knew that it was hard for him to, I don't know, arrest him or punish him in any other way, but he just didn't take any excuse. He just said, that's what I want. And this is how they can, punish you or discourage you when you do your work. I don't think the journalist had anything personal.
But,
with the
and if all
president.
that's true, then sort of the most sinister and unsettling thing here is that the primary threats to press freedom are things we may never see, because they don't result in a jailing, or they don't result in an imprisonment or a murder or something along those lines. They don't even end up in the numbers that we're debating over. It all sort of happens in the shadows.
Yeah, exactly. At least that's what I know. If they don't imprison you, there are other ways that they can come after you. They can force you to apologize or run a correction, and then if nothing happens, they just make you look bad, and then they block your access, and then once you're blocked, it's hard to do your job. Like they threaten sources to talk to you. So yeah, it's something that they can do, and they can get away easily with it.
think we have some questions from the audience.
Yes, we've had a few questions about safety, so I'm going to lump them all together. It's a three-part question. The first one is on an individual basis. What steps do you take to protect yourself and the safety of your sources? Then widening it out to what do your media outlets do to keep it safe? And finally, does the United Nations have a role in protecting journalists?
Okay, I will start if I'll get back to the case I mentioned of Mary Colvin and Remy Schlick, creating a press house, and while declaring it a press house, it is being, bombed immediately by Assad forces in Syria. There is a way for you to work, technically speaking. I mean, you know that when people look for journalists, and you are a target, forget about crossfire, you are a target because you do your work as a journalist, this is the way you operate. You have a satellite telephone because no other means of communication you have. What you do is when you need to make a call, because you don't make a call every day and you take, one call, you limit it for a few seconds, only what you really need to say, and when you finish this conversation, you're not just shutting the satellite phone, you take off the battery, and immediately you go away like 100 meters from where you stood 20 seconds ago, because you can be targeted within like 30 seconds. So this is the way you have to work. And unfortunately, we learn about this technique because of the unfortunate incident of Mary Colvin and Remy Schlick that were bombed immediately. Now, about my sources. I'm an Israeli, and had someone realize that I'm an Israeli in places like Iraq and Syria, in some of the places, it would be, to say the least, quite unfortunate. Luckily, as a journalist, luckily, I have a foreign passport. I have a foreign passport and not also Israeli, which enables me to go to places that other Israeli cannot. Now, when I see people, I have other nationality, I present myself. Later, when there is a feeling of a confidence, I say to them, I'm a Jewish. Never I encounter any problem, in Iraq or Syria. Then it gets, to a point that I feel that I can tell them that I'm an Israeli. And I will not do it, and I will tell you why. Because not of being afraid for my life, but I'm afraid from them. Because if, a jihadist will get to the neighborhood, and they will realize that I'm an Israeli, oh, Muhammad knew that he's an Israeli, and he's been talking to him, so Muhammad will be punished. Later on, when I finish, I make a contact with them. And I tell them, listen, I am this nationality, but I'm also an Israeli. And I ask your permission also to bring it on the Israeli television. Always, all the time, people told me yes, but on one condition. And the condition is, because we have no other choice, when you present your documentary, when you present your report, you should say at the beginning that the people, me as a source, didn't know that you were an Israeli. It's like a game we are playing because we have no other way. This is the only way for me to do what I think is the most important thing to do today for Israeli audience, to bring them what is happening, in the neighboring countries. So I will not mention, this guy knew that I'm an Israeli because he will be punished. So I said at the beginning, nobody knew that we are an Israelis, and these people will never get hurt. It is much more important than anything else. And we are still in contact, and this is why I keep going back to Iraq and Syria. I've been 3 times in Syria, 6 times in Iraq, and people who saw my documentary still, want me to go and still play this game because it is really, really a special case. I got to hide my Israeli identity while in there.
Can I say something about this? Was it about the safety?
About personal safety, about the role your media outlet has in keeping you safe, and on a wider level, whether the UN could do more to help journalists stay safe.
The personal safety has always been an issue to cover like a war zone. You have to be prepared to take some risk, and it could sometime end up to like taking your life. You could get killed. But yes, we do take some measures, like nowadays when we go out to cover like a bombing scene, we don't wear like a flak jacket because, it has been an issue with journalists who wore that if you wear a flak jacket and you have something on the top of it, it looks like you're wearing a suicide vest. So no more flak jackets, because you could get shot right at the scene by the security forces who are already there. But going out to provinces like and to the countryside, the measures that we take is that for me, we're advised not to carry our badge, not to show that who we work for, not to carry our phones, like our smartphones, because we have all the numbers, the photos of like sources and the work we do. We just dress like ordinary people and travel low profile, and that's how we get to where we want to go to do a story. And it is still risky. Like there are risks that you could get stopped by an illegal checkpoint and you could get kidnapped, but it's way safe than carrying your like helmet or a flak jacket or a badge that shows who you are, or your own phone. So these are the measures that we take. But again, it just covering a war. If you're lucky, you just make it. Otherwise, I mean, it's hard to say that someone who's advising you sitting behind a desk in a room can help you in any way. Once you go out, you have to take care of yourself. No one really knows who you run into and who stops you to ask you something, or where you stay, where you spend your night, what's the situation in the place you are. So yeah, I mean, it's totally up to yourself and your senses to make a decision, and that's how, I mean, I do my work personally, but it just saves me to go as low profile as possible and make sure that I don't have anything with me that affiliates me with the New York Times or my employer. And that's when I go out in the provinces, like in the villages. So, I mean, that's what I had to say here. And there's nothing from the UN as far as I know. Even though we have these hostile trainings that we get frequently, but, still, yeah.
You mentioned hostile training, so do your media organizations take responsibility for you out in the field?
Sometimes they do. We have these like 2 week, 3 weeks trainings, but it doesn't really help, because people who come to train you are either ex-military personnel. They don't really, I mean, they don't know your situation. You, as a journalist, need to talk to people, need to go to homes to visit people like elders or persons you need to interview. So in the meantime, you cannot have any protection like armed guards. Obviously, we cannot afford to have that, and it doesn't make sense to have someone like guarding you, because if you do that, then you won't get what you're after. Your subject will be scared and will not be telling you the truth. So, yeah, I mean, it's totally up to you. I've been thinking about this, that, as a journalist covering a war zone like Afghanistan, you're basically a soldier, except that you don't have a gun with you. So I mean, that's what you do. You go to the front line, you go to dangerous places, and you do things that's risky. But you have to do it. Someone has to do that to bring out the truth. So, yeah.
Got another question here from Twitter. Can you comment on the role of social media in contributing to violence against journalists? Is it a significant problem, social media?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge problem right now. It's a problem all over the world. So you have organized campaigns of trolling against journalists and dissidents. I mean, in Saudi Arabia, in many other authoritarian countries where, and Itai was talking about this a little bit before, but where the journalist is, or the dissident is singled out with hashtags that identify that person as an enemy of the state, an enemy of the people, somebody who other people should attack. That's probably the most pernicious kind of social media trolling, but there's also a tremendous amount of trolling of journalists, particularly in this country, women and people of color, really for anything they write. And it's extremely dangerous, and it's also very difficult for our legal system to handle. We don't have a lot of, you can't, I mean, from what I've heard, and people have talked about this, that you know, when you go to the police and you try to report this, they say, well, it's online. But these things do cross into the real world, and it's, you know, there's such things as doxing and other things which can make you very vulnerable. So it's a growing problem.
I had a couple of questions, one on Twitter, one on the audience, about whistleblowers, and in particular the role of the US government. So it's not directed so much as journalists, but the role of the government in going after people who leak information to the press. They mentioned Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning. I mean, there are others, I'm sure. They just wondered what your opinion was on that, on the role of the US government.
I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but I did want to say in regard to the earlier question about what we do to protect ourselves and our sources. So in the United States, the main people we have to protect are our sources. So there's a difference between a source and a whistleblower. A whistleblower is generally someone who wants to make a point of coming forward with information, sometimes in a public way, the way Edward Snowden did. He's a classic whistleblower. Most people are not that. Most people are sources who want to keep their jobs, working wherever they are, and if they are identified, they will be fired and they can be jailed. They can face, you know, consequences that will completely upend their lives. And so, you know, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to protect these people. It's increasingly difficult to do. There's been a culture that's developed over the last, I would say, at least decade here in the United States, and it was partly influenced by Snowden, of a kind of leak to us. Please send us your classified documents. We've had things like Secure Drop now, which make it easy for people to send information anonymously to media organizations. This is really different from the way it's been historically. Historically, when somebody leaked to you, it was a source you had cultivated for years. You knew exactly who this person was, you knew where they worked, you knew where this information was coming from, you knew why they were giving it to you because you'd been talking to them for many, many years in many cases. You know, that's the way it was, I think, with Deep Throat in the Watergate era. So it's very different now to have a document show up in your Dropbox, your anonymous Dropbox, and have no idea where it's coming from, who sent it to you, why, whether it's real or fake. I mean, authenticating classified documents that have never been seen by anyone, extremely difficult to do without getting someone in trouble. Because even taking that document to someone who might know whether it's real, you know, that puts them then in the sights of the government. So this is a very, very tricky business, and it's getting even harder.
There's a funny legal dimension to this as well, too. I think many of us long for the days of the transom, where a package would mysteriously get tossed over into someone's office, and heaven only knows how it got there, and so forth and so on. I've often thought that many reporters I've represented over the years must have had particularly big transoms because they got a lot of stuff that way. But part of the problem with the electronic transmission of information is you have to make sure it's being done in a secure, safe way. And there's this fine line between, on one hand, making sure it's being done in a secure, safe way, and on the other hand, facilitating it in a way that makes you a conspirator in the disclosure of information that shouldn't be disclosed. And so we have lots of conversations with reporters about this, trying to figure out how to do this and preserve everybody's rights and interests.
Kath, let's take one more question and then we're going to...
What keeps you doing the job when there's so much at risk?
That's good, because I wanted to make sure we talked about, with such a topic, we wanted to make sure that we can end on a hopeful note. So thank you for that segue.
Well, you know, I became interested in doing this job when I heard in 1989, I remember the name, his name was Graham Leach on BBC World Service, and he said, I'm standing now by the Berlin Wall and it is falling down. And I said to myself, no one would be able to convince me that there is a guy with a better job in the world. And this is how I became, you know, a journalist, that going into these places. And I gotta tell you, I never changed my mind. I think it's the most interesting thing you can do in your life. I don't think there is nothing in the world that I would prefer better to do than this one. Obviously, we talk about risks, and sometimes you reflect and think again and again whether you would like to do it one more time. But then you do it. And then you got like the thing that you created, and then you see the effect that you created. And you know, apart from that, I mean, you're going to places, you open your mind. It's not only bullets, bombs and grenades, and watching places, history, people, food, music, culture. You expose yourself to a place, you understand it better, you broaden your mind. And I think like there is a limit, you know, for someone when he's physically and mentally strong, that he or she can do it. And I emphasize she, because there are women more or less like men in this line of job. I mean, I don't know exactly about numbers, but you know, I got a few women colleagues, and sometimes they want me to go over there, and I said, no, this is not for me. And they will go, and I will stay aside. So I think there is a limit to the adventure that you can take in your life, and we are in a period of life that we are still relatively young, and we can do it. You know, later on, I will be also a commentator, whether it is CNN or Fox. I will knock on the table, and I talk about places I will never be in, but as far now, I got still the energy to keep on doing it. So yeah, this is the best job in life.
On that note, thank you for coming today. This is having a chance for those of us who have been through the program to just have this event every year where we come and honor Charles is in itself very meaningful. I certainly would not be standing here were it not for the program that he built, and hearing Itai speak about how much we all love journalism, that there is no job that we would rather do. And even those of us who get to the point where we stop running around the world, then take jobs where we hang out with people who are still running around the world because we can't get enough of it. But I want to point out that the topic that we talked about today, you know, we talked a lot about war zone coverage and conflict, but I do want to impress upon the audience that a lot of what is dangerous today for journalists is not happening in war zones. It is the danger that happened at the Capitol Gazette in Annapolis, Maryland, where journalists were sitting in open cubicles doing their jobs and someone walked in with a gun. It is what's happening in Mexico nearly every month, where journalists are coming to work and there's a box with a severed head on the doorstep outside the newsroom, to create a chilling effect so that the journalist who's going out to do their story that day will think twice about what they report, and that words matter. And so here in the United States, when we have these, when you hear people throw around a phrase like enemy of the people, I would challenge you as people who were interested enough in this topic to come here today. When you hear someone say that, challenge them on that. Ask them, what do you mean by that? Do you know what the roots of that comment are? What are you trying to say when you say that? It is not an innocuous comment. And if we in the United States cannot stand up for freedom of the press and the freedom and safety of the press, then we give permission to other countries that already act with impunity in these murders and these jailings to be even more outlandish and even more egregious. And as we go into another campaign season here, I think American journalists often don't like to be in the stories, but we have many stories within Wallace House of reporters who are undergoing really vicious harassment online. And the step between that harassment online and something much more dangerous happening, we hope that we do not see that in the next year, but it will take all of us to be vigilant. And so when you came in today, hopefully you saw when you got your program, we have a basket, and there are pins on there from Wallace House. There are 2 pins. They have 2 different statements on them. One very simple. The one I'm wearing says, "Journalists, champions of the people." I would invite you to take one and wear one. The other one says simply, "Uphold democracy, support journalists." Those are not political statements. They're just a statement of our basic values enshrined in our Constitution. And I would hope that you would all, because you're here today, stand up with us in support of those values. And our panelists, thank you for coming. Len, thank you for moderating. Charles, thank you for being Charles. And Julia, thank you for everything that takes to help Charles be Charles. And we hope you'll stay around a bit to talk. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.